June 26, 1944. 05:45 hours. Villers-Bocage, Normandy, France. The Panzer commander, who radioed Wehrmacht headquarters that morning, transmitted a message that would shatter 3 years of German propaganda. American Panzers are not the inferior machines we were promised. They are everywhere, they keep coming, and we cannot stop them all. What followed wasn't just a tactical surprise. It was the complete collapse of a carefully constructed lie that had sustained German morale since America entered the war. The Sherman tanks that rolled off the LST landing craft onto Omaha and Utah beaches on June 6, 1944, carried more than armor and ammunition. They carried the weight of German contempt. 3 years of propaganda dismissing American industrial output as quantity without quality. Mechanized circus wagons that would crumble before the might of German engineering. The Wehrmacht intelligence assessments, circulated through Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters in Berlin throughout 1943, had been unequivocal. American tanks represented minimal threat. The reports, stamped with classification markings and distributed to Panzer commanders across occupied Europe, painted a picture of mechanical inadequacy that would prove catastrophically wrong. The American M4 medium tank, read one intelligence summary dated November 1943, demonstrates typical American approach to warfare, mass production of inferior equipment. Armor thickness insufficient against German anti-tank weapons. Main armament inadequate for penetrating German heavy tanks. Crews poorly trained. Mechanical reliability questionable under combat conditions. These assessments weren't random prejudice. They built upon a foundation of genuine German technological superiority in the early war years. The Panzer III and IV had dominated France in 1940, swept across vast Soviet territories in 1941, and achieved kill ratios in North Africa that seemed to validate German armor doctrine. By 1943, the introduction of Tiger and Panther tanks created weapons that could, in direct combat, destroy almost any Allied tank at ranges where Allied guns couldn't penetrate German armor. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. Tiger I tanks with 88mm guns could penetrate Sherman armor at 2,000 meters. Sherman 75mm guns could only penetrate Tiger frontal armor at approximately 100 meters, if they could get that close. Panther tanks offered similar advantages with better mobility. German propaganda built an entire narrative around these statistics. Wehrmacht training films produced in 1943 showed German crews easily destroying mock-ups of American tanks. The narrator's voice, confident and reassuring, explained that American industrial capacity produced numbers, not quality. One tank crew instructor addressing new Panzer commanders at the training grounds near Paderborn reportedly told his students, "You will face many American tanks, but remember, 10 Shermans are still just 10 targets." This confidence permeated German military culture from the highest command levels to individual tank crews. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding German forces in the West, reviewed intelligence estimates in early 1944 projecting American armor strength. His response, documented in staff meeting notes, dismissed concerns about numerical superiority. Numbers mean nothing without quality. One Tiger is worth 10 of their Shermans. The German calculation contained fatal assumptions. They assumed American tanks would fight the way German tanks fought, seeking direct armor-on-armor engagements where superior German guns and armor would dominate. They assumed American crews would be poorly trained conscripts, unable to match veteran German Panzer commanders. They assumed American tanks would arrive in manageable numbers, allowing German forces to concentrate superior firepower against isolated units. Every assumption would prove wrong. The reality that Wehrmacht intelligence either missed or dismissed was developing in American factories, training grounds, and tactical doctrine schools throughout 1943 and early 1944. The Sherman tank that German intelligence mocked represented something more dangerous than superior armor or bigger guns. It represented industrial warfare perfected. American factories were producing Shermans at rates German intelligence considered impossible. The numbers, documented in U.S. Army ordnance records, told a story of manufacturing capacity beyond German comprehension. Monthly Sherman production reached 2,000 by mid-1943. Total production would exceed 49,000 by war's end. Germany would produce approximately 6,000 Panthers and 1,347 Tigers during the entire war. But German intelligence focused on the individual tank, not the system. They evaluated armor thickness, gun penetration, and speed, all metrics that German tanks often held advantages. They missed that American doctrine didn't plan to fight the way German tanks fought, seeking direct armor-on-armor engagements where superior German guns and armor would dominate. They assumed American crews would be poorly trained conscripts, unable to match veteran German Panzer commanders. They assumed American tanks would arrive in manageable numbers, allowing German forces to concentrate superior firepower against isolated units. Every assumption would prove wrong. The reality that Wehrmacht intelligence either missed or dismissed was developing in American factories, training grounds, and tactical doctrine schools throughout 1943 and early 1944. The Sherman tank that German intelligence mocked represented something more dangerous than superior armor or bigger guns. It represented industrial warfare perfected. June 26th, 20 days after D-Day, marked the moment when German illusions about American armor capabilities began their final collapse. But the seeds of that collapse were planted in every intelligence assessment that dismissed American industrial capacity, every training session that mocked American equipment, and every strategic calculation that confused tactical superiority with operational domination. The Shermans were coming, and there were always more Shermans. The German dismissal of American armor capabilities didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew from a complex mixture of legitimate early war successes, propaganda requirements, cultural prejudices, and genuine technological advantages that created a dangerous echo chamber within Wehrmacht intelligence circles. The foundation was laid in the summer of 1940. German panzer divisions had just achieved what military historians considered impossible, the complete defeat of France in 6 weeks. Panzer commanders like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel became heroes whose tactical innovations seemed to validate everything about German military doctrine. The Panzer III and IV tanks that spearheaded these victories appeared to represent the perfect balance of firepower, armor, and mobility. When German intelligence officers first examined captured American tank designs in 1942, following early engagements in North Africa, their assessments reflected this confidence. The M3 Lee/Grant medium tanks that American forces initially deployed featured awkward designs with hull-mounted main guns, riveted armor that created deadly spalling when hit, and gasoline engines that burned readily when penetrated. German after-action reports from North Africa documented numerous easy victories against these early American tanks. These early encounters created a template for German thinking that would persist long after American tank design evolved. A Wehrmacht intelligence bulletin from December 1942, captured after the war and now archived in U.S. military records, stated, "American armor doctrine emphasizes quantity and mechanical simplicity over fighting quality. Their crews show limited tactical flexibility. Their tanks are mechanically sound but tactically obsolete." The assessment wasn't entirely wrong in 1942, but it became doctrine, repeated in intelligence estimates, training materials, and strategic planning documents as if it were permanent truth rather than a snapshot of evolving capability. Cultural factors reinforced these technical assessments. German military tradition emphasized individual excellence, superior training, and technological sophistication. The concept of overwhelming with mass production seemed to many German officers almost distastefully American, industrialized warfare lacking the warrior spirit that they believed defined true military excellence. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels recognized the utility of dismissing American military capability. Throughout 1943, as German forces retreated in North Africa and faced setbacks in the Soviet Union, maintaining morale required enemies that could be portrayed as beatable. Newsreels showed German Tigers destroying Soviet T-34s, with narrators emphasizing German technical superiority. American equipment received similar treatment, portrayed as numerous but inferior, requiring many American tanks to equal one German Panzer. This propaganda served multiple purposes. It maintained civilian morale by suggesting that quality would triumph over quantity. It reassured soldiers that their equipment was superior, and it provided psychological comfort to a nation beginning to recognize that the war was turning against them. If German weapons were superior, then temporary setbacks must be due to overwhelming numbers, not fundamental strategic problems. Wehrmacht Panzer school curricula from 1943, preserved in post-war archives, devoted extensive time to teaching crews about their technological advantages. Instructors emphasized penetration tables showing German gun superiority. They practiced engagement scenarios where German tanks destroyed multiple enemy vehicles before being hit. The entire training framework built confidence in German technological superiority while subtly minimizing the significance of numerical inferiority. The intelligence failure extended to understanding American industrial capacity. German planners, even those familiar with pre-war American industrial output, seemed unable to comprehend the scale at which American factories could operate once fully mobilized. Reports about American tank production numbers were often dismissed as propaganda or mathematical errors. When accurate intelligence about Sherman production numbers reached German headquarters, staff officers frequently reduced the estimates, assuming exaggeration. The introduction of Tiger and Panther tanks in 1943 reinforced German confidence to dangerous levels. These were genuinely superior weapons in direct combat. Their guns could destroy any Allied tank at ranges where Allied guns couldn't penetrate their armor. The psychological impact on German panzer crews was significant. They had weapons that, in one-on-one engagements, were nearly unbeatable. But this tactical superiority masked operational vulnerability. Tigers and Panthers were mechanically complex, difficult to maintain, slow to produce, and logistically demanding. A single Tiger required the same manufacturing resources as 3 Panthers or 5 Panzer IVs. Germany's industrial capacity, already strained by strategic bombing and raw material shortages, couldn't produce enough heavy tanks to match American medium tank output. German intelligence estimates from early 1944, reviewing Allied preparations for the invasion of France, revealed systematic underestimation. One analysis, circulated to Panzer commanders in March 1944, estimated American forces might deploy 60 to 80 tanks per armored division. The actual American Armored Division organization fielded 260 tanks, with additional tank destroyer and independent tank battalions providing hundreds more. The mathematical reality was devastating. Germany produced approximately 1,300 Panthers in the first half of 1944. During the same period, American factories produced over 10,000 Shermans. Even if every Panther could destroy 5 Shermans before being knocked out, an optimistic ratio, the numbers didn't favor Germany. Field commanders closer to combat reality sometimes recognized these problems. General Leo von Schweppenberg, commanding Panzer Group West before the invasion, requested intelligence reassessments of American armor strength. His concerns were noted, but not acted upon. The official estimates remained dangerously low. The German officer corps, trained in a tradition that emphasized offensive action and decisive engagement, struggled to adapt doctrine for defensive warfare against numerically superior opponents. Panzer tactics developed during years of offensive operations, which included aggressive maneuver, concentration of force, and exploitation of breakthrough, became increasingly difficult to execute as German forces faced material shortages and Allied air superiority. By June 1944, cracks appeared in the facade of German confidence. Officers with North Africa or Italian campaign experience who had faced American forces in extended combat sometimes provided more realistic assessments, but their warnings competed with official intelligence estimates, propaganda narratives, and institutional bias to believing in German superiority. The stage was set for catastrophic miscalculation. German forces prepared to face what they believed would be limited numbers of American tanks crewed by inadequately trained soldiers, unsupported by effective combined arms coordination. They prepared for a battle they understood, where their superior weapons and tactical skill would prevail. They were about to discover that industrial warfare operates by different mathematics, where sustainability defeats superiority, where logistics determine outcomes more than tactics, and where the ability to replace losses transforms the nature of combat itself. The Shermans were rolling off assembly lines faster than German forces could destroy them, and behind every Sherman knocked out, 3 more were already en route to France. The first sustained armor engagement between American Shermans and German Panzers in Normandy occurred on June 13, 1944, 7 days after D-Day near the town of Caumont. What German intelligence had predicted would be a straightforward defensive victory became something entirely different, a preview of the industrial mathematics that would define armored warfare for the remainder of the campaign. Panzer Lehr Division, considered one of Germany's elite armored formations, deployed elements of its tank regiment to stop American advances southwest of Bayeux. The division commander, Fritz Bayerlein, had personally reviewed intelligence estimates suggesting American armor would be limited in number and quality. His after-action reports, captured after the war, documented his shock at what actually appeared. "We expected perhaps 30 to 40 American tanks," Bayerlein later testified to Allied interrogators. "We counted over 150 in the first engagement alone, with clear indications of many more in reserve. Every time we knocked out 3 or 4, 6 more appeared. It was like fighting the sea. You cannot destroy waves." The tactical engagement followed patterns that would repeat throughout the Normandy campaign. German tanks, positioned in carefully prepared defensive positions, achieved initial kills at favorable ranges. Panzer IV and Panther crews reported successful hits, watching Shermans brew up, the term used for tanks catching fire after penetration. The German crews, trained to expect demoralized withdrawal after inflicting casualties, instead witnessed American forces adapting in real time. American doctrine, developed through extensive training and refined by North African and Italian campaign experience, emphasized combined arms coordination that German intelligence had consistently underestimated. Sherman platoons didn't charge German positions suicidally. They maneuvered to force German tanks to expose flanks, called in artillery fire to suppress German positions, coordinated with tank destroyers carrying high-velocity guns, and critically, waited for air support. June 13th saw one of the first major coordinated airstrikes supporting American armor in Normandy. P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers operating with newly refined ground coordination procedures struck German panzer positions while Shermans maneuvered. The psychological impact on German crews was immediate and devastating. Panzer commanders accustomed to tactical flexibility found themselves pinned by air attack while American tanks advanced from multiple directions. German radio intercepts, decoded by Allied intelligence, captured the evolution of German assessment in real time. Early messages reflected confidence. American panzers engaged at favorable range, multiple kills confirmed. Hours later, the tone shifted. American tank strength greater than estimated, request additional anti-tank support. By evening, cannot maintain position against combined American armor and air attack, ammunition depleted, withdrawing to secondary positions. The Battle of Villers-Bocage on June 13th and 14th provided another data point that shattered German assumptions. The famous German tank ace Michael Wittmann, commanding a Tiger tank, achieved spectacular initial success, destroying multiple British tanks and vehicles in a legendary ambush. German propaganda seized on this engagement as validation of superior German equipment and crew quality. But the full battle told a different story. Wittmann's initial success came from surprise and tactical positioning, factors that could work once but not repeatedly. When British forces, including Sherman Fireflies with 17-pounder guns capable of penetrating Tiger armor, counterattacked with coordinated infantry and artillery support, German forces withdrew. Whitman's Tiger, the supposedly invincible weapon, retreated before overwhelming combined arms pressure. By late June, German after-action reports began reflecting a new reality. A Panzer Lehr divisional report dated June 25 noted, American armored forces demonstrate unexpected tactical flexibility. Crews show competence in maneuver and coordination. Equipment reliability exceeds intelligence estimates. Most critically, American forces demonstrate ability to rapidly replace losses while our replacements arrive slowly, if at all. The Sherman's mechanical reliability proved particularly devastating to German calculations. American tanks could operate continuously with minimal maintenance. When Shermans were knocked out, recovery vehicles quickly retrieved damaged tanks for repair. Tank crews that survived knockouts received replacement tanks within days, preserving valuable combat experience. German tanks, particularly Tigers and Panthers, required extensive maintenance. Panther final drive failures became notorious. The tank's advanced design included components that failed regularly under combat stress. A Panther might achieve superior kills in combat, but spend days awaiting repairs. Tigers, while formidable, consumed fuel at rates that strained German logistics and required specialized maintenance that field units struggled to provide. American logistics demonstrated industrial warfare's true power. Each Sherman tank required approximately 200 gallons of fuel daily during active operations. American supply systems, built on massive LST supply ships, dedicated cargo vessels, and rapidly constructed fuel depots, delivered fuel in quantities that seemed limitless to German observers. Ammunition, spare parts, and replacement vehicles flowed through supply chains that operated with industrial efficiency. German logistics, by contrast, collapsed under Allied air interdiction. Fuel shortages forced Panzer units to limit operations. Spare parts became precious commodities hoarded by unit mechanics. Replacement tanks arrived sporadically, often delayed by transportation bottlenecks and manufacturing limitations. Panzer divisions that entered Normandy at authorized strength steadily declined as attrition exceeded replacement rates. The psychological impact on German tank crews evolved through June and July. Initial confidence, built on years of tactical success and propaganda about equipment superiority, gave way to recognition that they faced a different kind of warfare. Veteran Panzer commanders interviewed after the war consistently described the same realization. They could win individual engagements but couldn't win the campaign, because American forces could sustain losses indefinitely while German forces could not. A captured German tank company commander interviewed in July 1944 provided a stark assessment. We were told one German tank equals 5 American tanks. This may be true in direct combat, but the Americans have 50 tanks for every one of ours, and when we destroy 10, they bring up 20 more. Mathematics defeats quality. By early July, German intelligence was frantically revising estimates upward. Reports documenting American armor strength in Normandy climbed from initial estimates of 500 tanks to revised figures exceeding 3,000, with growing recognition that these numbers would only increase. Intelligence officers who had dismissed American industrial capacity now struggled to convince higher command that their earlier estimates were catastrophically wrong. The bocage terrain of Normandy initially favored defense, allowing German forces to maximize their tanks' combat advantages in close-range engagements. But even here, American forces adapted. Sherman tanks received improvised hedgerow cutters, steel prongs that allowed them to burst through hedgerows rather than climb over them. A tactical adaptation developed, tested, and field-deployed in weeks. German adaptation proceeded far slower. New tactics required training, coordination, and resources. Panzer units, constantly engaged and increasingly short on fuel, ammunition, and replacement vehicles, had limited capacity for tactical innovation. They fought with skill and determination, achieving impressive kill ratios in individual engagements, but steadily lost the larger campaign. The Shermans kept coming. Behind every Sherman knocked out in Normandy, 3 more rolled off ships at artificial mulberry harbors. Behind those 3, a dozen more awaited transport from British ports. Behind those, American factories produced hundreds more monthly. The industrial weight of American war production, dismissed by German intelligence as quantity without quality, was crushing German forces through sheer sustainability. The awakening was complete. The Americans weren't deploying circus wagons. They were deploying industrial warfare perfected. Adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers, crewed by increasingly experienced soldiers, supported by logistics that couldn't be disrupted, and coordinated with combined arms that German forces couldn't match. Quality hadn't defeated quantity. Industrial capacity had redefined what quality meant.
Operation Cobra, launched July 25, 1944, marked the moment when German illusions about containing American armor finally shattered completely. What began as defensive confidence had eroded through June and July into nervous recognition of numerical inferiority. Cobra transformed that recognition into strategic panic. The operation opened with carpet bombing unprecedented in its intensity. 1,500 heavy bombers dropping over 3,000 tons of explosives on a 5-mile front west of Saint-Lô. German forces, already worn by continuous combat, experienced devastation that transcended tactical defeat. Entire units ceased to exist. Communication networks collapsed. Command structures disintegrated. Into this maelstrom poured American armor. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions, along with the 1st Infantry Division's attached tank battalions, deployed over 500 Sherman tanks in the initial assault. German forces, expecting to face the usual American armor strength of perhaps 100 tanks, instead confronted an armored avalanche that exploited the breach faster than German reserves could respond. General Fritz Bayerlein, whose Panzer Lehr division occupied defensive positions in Cobra's path, later provided testimony that captured the psychological impact. The bombing was devastating, but we had survived bombardments before. What broke us was seeing American tanks advancing in numbers we couldn't count. Every road, every field seemed filled with their armor. We had perhaps 20 operational tanks. They had hundreds. Mathematics, not tactics, defeated us. The breakout from Normandy demonstrated Sherman capabilities that German intelligence had never acknowledged. American tanks advanced 30 miles in the first 3 days, a rate of exploitation that matched or exceeded German blitzkrieg advances that had made Panzer forces legendary. The difference was sustainability. German advances typically outran logistics and required consolidation. American advances continued because supply chains kept pace. Third Army, activated August 1st under General George Patton, received over 400 Sherman tanks in its armored divisions. Patton's operational tempo, advancing 60 to 100 miles daily in some sectors, would have been impossible without mechanically reliable tanks and logistics that delivered fuel and ammunition to forward units regardless of distance from supply depots. German forces attempting to contain the breakout discovered that their remaining Panthers and Tigers, while individually superior in direct combat, couldn't be everywhere. American doctrine deliberately avoided German strongpoints, bypassing defensive positions to strike exposed flanks and rear areas. When German armor did engage, American forces typically enjoyed numerical superiority of 5 or 10 to 1 at the point of contact.
The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's final major offensive in the West, launched December 16, 1944, represented the last test of German assumptions about American armor. Hitler's plan sought to exploit what German intelligence believed remained a fundamental American weakness: dependence on equipment over fighting spirit. The offensive would prove instead that Germany had learned nothing from 6 months of defeats. German forces assembled for the Ardennes offensive included approximately 600 tanks and assault guns, representing a significant portion of Germany's remaining armored strength. The concentration required stripping other fronts, gathering everything from Tigers and Panthers to obsolete Panzer IVs and captured French equipment. This force, German planners believed, could achieve breakthrough against American lines weakly held by divisions recovering from previous battles. The initial assault achieved tactical surprise. American forces, including several armored divisions, were indeed caught off guard by the scale and location of the German attack. In the opening days, German Panzer spearheads advanced rapidly through forest roads, capturing fuel dumps and equipment. It appeared, briefly, as if German calculations might prove correct, that American forces would collapse under determined assault by superior German equipment and veteran crews. The appearance proved illusory. American response demonstrated exactly the sustainability advantage that German intelligence had failed to comprehend, despite 6 months of evidence. Within 48 hours of the offensive start, American forces were redirecting entire armored divisions to threatened sectors. Third Army, operating 100 miles south of the breakthrough, executed a 90-degree pivot, moving multiple divisions north in 3 days, a logistical achievement that would have been impossible without reliable equipment and overwhelming supply capacity. By December 22nd, American forces had more tanks in the Ardennes than German forces, despite having been surprised and forced to respond reactively. Sherman tanks arrived by the hundreds, delivered through supply chains that operated regardless of weather or enemy action. German panzer forces, by contrast, were discovering that their carefully hoarded fuel was insufficient because their advance had been slower than planned, and American fuel dumps they'd counted on capturing had been destroyed by retreating American forces. The siege of Bastogne illustrated the complete reversal of armored warfare dynamics. German forces surrounded the town, held by American airborne infantry, and attacked repeatedly to eliminate the pocket. American relief forces, spearheaded by 4th Armored Division's Sherman tanks, broke through German encirclement in 4 days of continuous attack. German intelligence had predicted that surrounded American forces would surrender and that relief attempts would be easily defeated. Both predictions proved wrong. What German commanders discovered during the Bulge was that American armor doctrine had evolved through 6 months of combat into something far more effective than they'd faced in Normandy. Sherman crews were veterans now, experienced in combined arms coordination, confident in their equipment, and supported by logistics that seemed unlimited. American forces didn't rely on individual tank superiority. They overwhelmed German positions with coordinated artillery, air support when weather permitted, and armor employed in mass. German panzer commanders, interviewed after the war, described the Bulge as the moment they recognized complete defeat. One Panther Battalion commander testified, "We began the offensive with 40 tanks. After 1 week, we had 12 operational. Not because we lost 28 in combat, we lost perhaps 10 to enemy action. The rest broke down, ran out of fuel, or were abandoned when we couldn't recover them." Meanwhile, Americans seemed to have unlimited tanks. Every position we took, they counterattacked with fresh armor. The weather cleared after Christmas, allowing Allied air forces to resume operations. What followed was systematic destruction of German armor trapped in the salient. P-47s and other fighter bombers, coordinating with ground forces, turned every road into a kill zone. German tanks that survived combat succumbed to air attack or fuel exhaustion. The offensive that was supposed to prove German armored superiority instead demonstrated complete Allied dominance. By January 1945, German forces were retreating, having accomplished nothing except delaying their inevitable defeat. The offensive cost Germany approximately 600 tanks and assault guns, irreplaceable losses representing months of production. American losses were heavier in absolute numbers, but replacement tanks were already arriving. The differential in sustainability was absolute. Post-war German military assessments, compiled by senior officers for American interrogators, acknowledged the fundamental miscalculation. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army during the Bulge, stated, "We planned for a war we understood. Breakthrough, exploitation, and disruption of enemy logistics. We failed to recognize that American logistics couldn't be disrupted because they had redundancy beyond anything in our experience. We knocked out supply depots, and they used alternate depots. We destroyed bridges, and they built new ones. We attacked their tanks, and more tanks appeared." The final months of the war saw German armored forces reduced to shadows. Panzer divisions existed on paper, but fielded fewer than 20 tanks each. Fuel shortages meant even operational tanks often couldn't move. Crews, increasingly composed of hastily trained recruits, couldn't match even average American crew quality. The Wehrmacht, which began the war with the world's most effective armored forces, ended it with almost no operational armor remaining. American armored forces, by contrast, entered Germany in spring 1945 stronger than they'd been in Normandy. Divisions were at full strength, equipped with improved Sherman variants including the M4A3E8, Easy 8 with better suspension, and the Sherman Firefly with high-velocity guns. Crews were veterans with months or years of combat experience. Logistics operated so efficiently that fuel shortages were measured in hours, not days, and replacement tanks arrived faster than combat could destroy them. The crossing of the Rhine in March 1945 demonstrated the complete transformation. German forces attempted to destroy bridges and defend river crossings with whatever armor remained. American forces, deploying hundreds of tanks, established bridgeheads against minimal opposition and exploited into Germany's interior at rates exceeding 50 miles daily. German armor couldn't contest these advances because German armor barely existed. The end came in factory yards where incomplete Panthers and Tigers sat abandoned, lacking components that could no longer be manufactured or delivered. It came in destroyed German columns where tanks were abandoned for lack of fuel. It came in the last desperate battles where German crews, fighting with courage that couldn't overcome material disadvantage, died in tanks that represented technological sophistication without industrial support. The Sherman tank, mocked by German intelligence in 1943 as an inferior weapon, rolled through Germany in 1945 as the symbol of industrial warfare perfected. It wasn't the best tank of World War II by many technical metrics. German Panthers and Tigers remained superior in armor and firepower. But the Sherman was superior in every metric that mattered for victory: reliability, producibility, sustainability, and availability. The final accounting revealed the magnitude of German miscalculation. America produced over 49,000 Sherman tanks during World War II. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers and 1,347 Tigers. Even if every German heavy tank destroyed 5 Shermans, an impossible ratio, the numbers favored America overwhelmingly. Industrial capacity, dismissed by German intelligence as irrelevant to combat effectiveness, proved to be the decisive factor of armored warfare. German veterans gathering in post-war years often discussed what might have been different. The conversations inevitably returned to the same conclusion. Nothing could have changed the outcome once they faced American industrial capacity. Superior tactics, better trained crews, more advanced technology, all proved irrelevant against an opponent who could absorb losses and continue fighting stronger than before. The Shermans, that German propaganda called circus wagons, crushed the Wehrmacht. They did it not through technical superiority, but through the mathematics of industrial warfare, where quantity, reliability, and sustainability defeat quality that cannot be sustained. The German assumption that 10 Shermans were just 10 targets proved wrong. 10 Shermans were the first wave of 100 Shermans, backed by 1,000 more, supported by industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than combat could inflict them. The lesson was absolute. In industrial warfare, the side that can field adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers, sustain them logistically, and replace losses indefinitely will defeat the side with superior weapons that cannot be produced, sustained, or replaced at comparable rates. German intelligence learned this lesson 6 months too late, and by then, defeat was mathematical certainty.